So I'm curious with Zach. I mean, obviously, he's a huge part of that plan. Do you remember the moment where either it was Joe telling you or you guys making a decision together where you're like, all right, that's it. He's the guy. We have landed on this as the decision.
There was when we first got here, we had, we usually don't start watching draftable guys till after free agency. You might contact at guys, but we went quick on, not quick, but we started early on the quarterbacks. So I think we started mid-February. We started going at it in terms of watching the top 7 or so quarterbacks. And nobody was allowed to talk to anybody. That was part of the rules. And just show us.
Why is that?
Well, you want independent thought.
Sure.
And, just independent evaluation. And then the first time those independent thoughts were shared were together. And there's no wrong answers. You want different opinions. You want, it's okay if you missed on a guy. Like there's no wrong answer. I mean, it's all roll of dice anyway. But the idea being that if you're all of independent thought and you all come to the same agreement, then you're probably not going to miss. But if you're all collaborating and talking in terms of, hey, I kind of like this guy, and you're swaying opinion, and we trick ourselves into liking a guy that may or may not work, if that makes sense. But so it started way back in February, and just the entire evaluation process, we discussed it all, and it was clear to us that Zach was, I'm not saying head and shoulders above all of them, but he was clearly one of the top 2 quarterbacks and worth at least the number 2 pick, at the very least. And if not the number 1 pick, if in years where whatever, you get my point. But
I get where you're going.
Yeah. So he was, when for us, the stamp came when, all the medicals came in and all that. Joe, again, the discipline to go through his process, check every box, not just jump on the gun. Like, it could have been very easy for him to take all the calls early and to just force the issue. But he went through his process. He let the offseason kind of play itself out. And when it came time to pull the trigger, we pulled the trigger. And credit to Joe and his diligence and his patience. We all think it worked out great for everybody.
Is there a trait, or whether personality or physical, that you think ultimately sold you, that swayed you toward him in the process?
When we had our, we were allowed Zoom meetings with all the players, and we went about, not that it was different, but just in talking football with Zach, his recall, his football IQ, his what he sees, just his questions being asked. Like, that meeting was, to me, was so impressive. I'll put it now from a defensive standpoint on the same level of what we felt with Fred Warner when we interviewed him, and we felt like Fred Warner was probably the smartest linebacker interview that I've ever had.
Put something in the water there in Provo, I guess.
Right. And so then we talked to Zach, and I was like, I can't imagine, because be real, as that this offseason was first time I've been in those quarterback meetings.
Sure.
Interviews of interviewing a draftable prospect. And so I just talked to Greg Knapp, who's been in a million of them. He's coached Hall of Famers. And I was like, I can't imagine that being any better. Like, you can't get better than that, can you? I mean, there's no way. And Knapp was emphatic. He goes, that was ridiculous. And so that was kind of the moment for us.
Coming from a guy that coached Peyton Manning, it's not necessarily a bad stamp of approval to have.
He's coached some unbelievable quarterbacks. Steve Young, obviously, and so he's, knock on wood for him. Matt Ryan, he's coached some very, very, very talented quarterbacks.
So obviously, the staff you put together is so interesting to me, and just the idea of building a staff in that process has always fascinated me. I remember talking to Frank Reich a couple years ago about trying to find the right balance between people who know and understand your system, so there's a depth of knowledge, but also diversity of thought, bringing in people from different backgrounds to kind of give you the right mix of stuff. That's important. For you, especially on defense, going through all of your position coaches, I want to say, I think every single guy you have either was on your staff in San Francisco or you would cross paths with at some point and is from what we'll call the Seattle tree, for lack of a better term. was that conscious, and how did you try to think about that depth of knowledge versus a mixture of different backgrounds and thoughts when you were putting that staff together?
That's a great question. So for us, everyone, the foundation, the start of it all was that Seattle system. And when we got to San Francisco, we branched off, and if you really watch it, it's far from what it was. But
a lot of cover four, which I was going to ask you about if we have enough time.
But a lot of the principles are the same in terms of the way we teach techniques, the foundation behind it all. It's evolved greatly. Now, when you look at Ulbrich, he's attached to the foundation. Mark Von Manuel understands the foundation. Obviously, we brought in a couple other guys. The foundational teaching aspect of it is what's most important. But at the same time, to me, so to be able to, it is very, very hard for, and not that it can't be done, but for coaches to, when you've had a certain style of coaching your whole life, and then you come into our system and you're like, well, we got to be doing more than this. I'm like, no, you've got to coach it better than what you're coaching it. Like that's the answer. The answer is yeah, there's a balance. The answer is that there's a balance, but ultimately the player is the one that's got to make the decisions and play as fast as humanly possible with only 10 seconds to think about it. And how can you help that player get to that point? But so with our staff, it was important for us to bring in people who understood where we were coming from and had that foundational piece, and then pull them along in terms of what we've evolved to. And then once they've seen what we've pulled and what we've done, all right, now from your past experiences of going to Atlanta and learning a few things, Marquand went to Philadelphia and got some things from Schwartz, and Tony Oden has had his history, Ricky Manning from the Lovie Smith history of playing. And then we bring in Burke, who's not only doing game management, but he's also part of that Schwartz system. And so how do we take what you've done and can we stretch the evolution of our system just more without disrupting the essence of what we want our players to accomplish, which is play as fast as humanly possible. And so there was a lot of thought that went into that, and there's a lot of people upset with me because there weren't spots, but we win enough, people get head jobs, and we'll circle back. So.
It's really interesting. So you want to make sure you have the bedrock of how you teach it, the principles, and then you can grow from there. And also the way that you guys grew in San Francisco, I think that from between 18 and 19, that's when Chris Kasurik got there, Joe Woods got there. So people from some different backgrounds, and you guys had sort of a kind of seismic shift in the way you approach the defense from that 18 season to the 19 season. And you had a ton of success, whether it was more quarters or the attacking style along the defensive line. Would you say it's fair that transition from 18 to 19 is when you really settled into what you wanted to be defensively? That's when the identity of the current version of your defense kind of took full bloom?
Yeah, when we went, so during that season, we've always had a style of play that we played up front. With the under front, sometimes 4-man, 6, playing the 6 technique, which is the end over a tight end. Mm-hmm. And studying tape, going through the offseason, I'm a big fan of Schwartz, big fan of Sean McDermott, and obviously in our system with Gus Bradley and all that. So when I went back in 18 and we evaluated everything, it became clear that wide 9 was something that we felt like would work in our system, like especially with the way we have our linebackers playing. And I was like, if we're going to do this, there's one person who was available that was the best in the world, in our opinion, in terms of coaching it. And he had happened to get fired from Miami because the staff got fired. And it became a bidding war between us at San Francisco. The Jets were trying to, with Adam because he was with them, Oakland, Cleveland. I mean, there was a bunch of teams, Arizona. And we had a number 2 pick. We had Buckner, Armstead, and he was like, this is, like
he's a kid in a candy store. I mean,
yeah, he was like, there's no way that this team can fail, and it's from a front standpoint. And by bringing in the system and having him coach it, teach it to all of us, and then tying in where even for him in discussions, evolving and changing some of what he did to match and marry what we do without disrupting. It's the same thing. Like, you have your foundation, And for him to evolve his front to match, and just the discussions that he and I would have to make that thing work. Like there's an evolution that's happened there. And so just the conversations and being able to evolve and kind of morph this thing into what we do it's been really cool to watch over the last 2 years.
And then Aaron Whitecotton came with you from San Francisco. So you'll bring those same principles theoretically. And so that's the thing, right? You are evolving. Even though it's same people from a certain background, there are these little wrinkles every year that you grow and you change and you're a little bit harder to predict. And that process is always so interesting to me.
It's the Seattle 3 system back in the day, all we did was run 3D. It was like every play. And, but the league is, and now I'm even to this day, I look back and I'm like, wow, it took them so long to figure out that system. And they, at times it's still like, well, just the trouble, especially when you can't tee off, like call them haymakers. There's only so many things you can do to attack it. And they're so clear when you see it happening. But when you can get it to a point where what I'm trying to say, I guess, is that offenses are too evolved. Coordinators are too evolved. If you run the same thing over and over and over and over, eventually they're going to punch you in the mouth. And you have to have just enough. You have to have variation to your system. But the balance in coaching to me comes when you have to have enough to make sure that the coordinator can't just call haymakers and that players on offense can play without thinking because they know exactly where you're going to be. But at the same time, you have to have just enough to where the player doesn't fall off a cliff in terms of his ability to play fast. So there's balance there, and there's learning your players, and there's learning how they respond to coaching and what they can absorb day in and day out with all the different things that you try to install.
And that shift to more cover 4 on early downs is really interesting. I think that you guys led the league I think you were third in the NFL in cover 4 snaps on first and second down last year, which is a departure from what you used to do. And Staley did a lot of that too. And I'm curious why on early downs more people are going to that, but we're running out of time. I wanted to ask you one more question though. I heard Richard Sherman the other day talking about the back and forth you guys would have, whether it was in game or during the week. And obviously you have a long-standing relationship. I'm just wondering, do you have a set process for how you incorporate player feedback? Are there times during the week where you meet? Is it organic? Like, how do you solicit those ideas and fold them into what you guys do?
For one, it's mainly organic, but there's going to be situations where coaches are sitting there at 9 a.m. just banging their head on the wall in terms of how do we want to fit this concept, for example. And for us, it's always been our philosophy of, all right, card up these 3 plays. Don't show them to the players and just run it and walk through. Just use it as a walkthrough rep. And let's just see what they do. And then from there, we'll bring it in and let's talk to the players because you usually come in, you get like a 15-minute meeting with the players before you go out to practice. And you just say, hey, how do you guys see this? How do you guys want to play this? And the players usually will tell you what they're feeling. And never, to us as a coach, go against what a player feels. And so a lot of times in those moments of gray area, a player can make it black and white just by going through that process. So as coaches, you have to check your ego, to me, and allow the player to go out there. Let's just see what they do, And a lot of times the player will be like, they'll kick back like, wait a minute, and then you just have a conversation and like, well, what do you think, Sherm? And Sherm will, well, I think if we. So, all right, let's watch these 3 clips. Let's go back in. Let's watch it. Let's talk it. And we all get on the same page and now we're rolling. But those things happen. Like it's a lot of times, you get lost in the amount of things you're telling a player. And you never, as a coach, want to contradict the player's technique. That's where players go haywire. That's where players call BS. That's where you lose trust with your player. And so those moments, so it is very organic to us in the way we coach.
But that's a very conscious thing to do, is to kind of put the situation right there to make them give you the feedback in real time. So even if it's organic, little tricks of the trade to get what you want out of those guys.
They're the ones out there taking it in. So they're the ones who are feeling everything that's happening to them. So no one is going to be able to explain it better than they are from an empathy standpoint. And it's, and so why wouldn't you ask? I get it. Like there's the old saying of I coach, you play, shut up, but that doesn't apply. We're all in this together. Some coaches don't have every answer. Players don't have every answer, but if we work together, we can find the answer. And that's kind of the model we try to have.